So Joab has perpetrated a ruse for King David, but King David gets the point, and he also gets the justification. And he does, in fact, justify bringing Absalom back to the country. Joab has bent over backwards to make this happen, presumably to please David. I think Joab would do almost anything to please David. And when I say almost anything, I probably mean anything. You got to be careful with a Joab in your life. I've cautioned about this before, but when you have a Joab in your life, their concern for you and their concern for what you want are indistinguishable from what's true and good, and they will do anything. And so, sure enough, Joab bends over backwards to bring a justification to bring Absalom back. But the question, of course, then is how do you bring back the wealthy son of a leader of a country who has done crimes and it not somehow increase lawlessness? The rich people get away with murder and the poor people go to jail. This has been an old problem. It's a problem our country is currently in, with the children of very wealthy leaders who can do presumably anything, and no one pays attention to it. Whereas you or I, if we were to do a tenth of those things, we would obviously be in jail. It is a problem in a society when that's the case. It increases oppression. It does, in fact, subvert justice. It is not good. But Joab is the principal facilitator of that, and it's not going to work out well for Joab. And so let's move on. Verse 21, Then the king said to Joab, Behold, I will surely do this thing. Therefore go bring back the young man Absalom. Joab fell on his face to the ground, prostrated himself, and blessed the king. And then Joab said today, Your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, O my lord, the king, and that the king has performed the request of his servant. So Joab arose, went to Geshur, brought back Absalom to Jerusalem. However, the king said, Let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. And so Absalom turned to his own house and did not see the king's face. And so this is a middle ground. It's been 3 years, and so David can justify bringing Absalom back, but he cannot admit him into his presence. This is to bring a certain level of censure and correction, at least the idea of making a show of standing up for justice. And does that work in people's minds? Who knows? What does work is that people do accept it, and they seem to accept it because of Absalom himself, and the passage goes to some detail to explain why. We look at verse 25. Now in Israel there was no one as handsome as Absalom, so highly praised from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, and there was no defect in him. And when he cut the hair of his head, it was at the end of every year, and so he cut it off, for it was heavy on him. And so he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels by the king's weight. To Absalom there were born 3 sons, 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. Now Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem and did not see the king's face. You realize that the passage is setting us up for something here, that ultimately not only is Absalom the son of the king, but he's a handsome son of the king. The other sort of universal rule is that attractive people get away with more in society than unattractive people. It's tough to picture a handsome person as an ogre, and that's the way it is. Beauty opens doors. It's the world we live in. Get used to it. And so Absalom, partially the skids are greased by the fact that he is handsome, but he's also a family man. He reminds people probably very much of a younger King David, and that may be part of the issue as well. But another 2 full years go by with Absalom in some sort of exile, some sort of house arrest. Then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. So he sent again a second time, but he would not come. Of course, Joab does not want to appear to go behind the king's back or to go against the king, so Joab doesn't talk to Absalom either. He facilitates his acceptance back into the country. He facilitates his reestablishment in his own home and business and all of these things, but it would be too far to be seen together. Therefore he said to his servant, "See, Joab's field is next to mine. He has barley there. Go set it on fire." This is one of the funniest stories in all of the Old Testament to me. This is who Absalom is. I think it points to sort of a spoiled nature, a nature which is just completely self-absorbed. Absalom wants Joab to come. Joab doesn't come. Absalom gives him another try. Joab doesn't come. So Joab burns his property down. In Absalom's mind, that's perfectly reasonable. What kind of person is that perfectly reasonable to? Well, in my experience, wealthy, very self-oriented people. In Absalom's world, the world is about him. And everybody who doesn't jump through his hoops is persona non grata, including even Joab, who was his hero, who heroically brought him back. Joab arose, came to Absalom in his house, and said, "Why have your servants set my field on fire?" Absalom answered, "Joab, behold, I sent for you, saying, 'Come here, that I may send you to the king.' Why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me to still be there. Now, therefore, let me see the king's face, and if there's iniquity in him, let me put him to death. Let me be put to death." So when Joab came to the king and told him, he called for Absalom. Thus he came to the king, prostrated himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. "Why did your servants burn my field down? Because you didn't come." It seems at this point, Joab, being Joab, would have recognized there was a problem. He should have suspected this isn't going to work out well. Why does he acquiesce to Absalom's demands? Well, because David wants also a justification to receive Absalom back. He knows it'll make David happy. And I think that's what pushes this decision, because somebody who burns your property down, you're just disinclined to help. But Joab helps. And so begins a setup for the next bit. It actually will turn out to further show that God's judgment for the sin of Bathsheba is on David's household, and it almost costs him everything. Of course, we know by God's promise he won't, but it is a close run thing for quite some time.